Welcome to the Liberty Beacon Rant. And as usual, I'm your host, Roger Landry. And also, as usual, I'm joined by Paula Mathers, who seems to be in a bit of a tizzy today. What's up, Paula?
We've got a storm. I'm a Pisces. The fish get all crazy.
Okay, well, if anybody listened to our show last week, they know that this series, okay, is called basically, it's the four weapons of mass destruction humanity may not survive. And Paula, if you could go ahead and put that link into the chat group so that anybody who is there can at least take a look at it. That is an outline of the four topics that we're going to be discussing during this series. Now, last week I said it was going to be a 6-part series, including the intro, which we did last week, and then a summary show, which comes at the end, with 4 shows, one for each topic. And the topics are perpetual warfare, GMOs, vaccines, and chemtrails. But I went through all of my research that I've done and all of the articles that I've written, and anybody who listens to this show knows that I base my shows on articles that have been written because that gives you a comfort level that research has actually been done. So when we do a show, what we do is we put the links to the articles that pretty much steer the show into the chat group so you can somewhat follow along. Now, we might not cover everything in each article. We might cover several articles, bits and pieces from each over the course of a show. But what I've determined is there is way too much information here for this to be a 6-part series. So at this point, it's looking more like 8 parts to this series. Anyway, 8 parts is probably going to be more realistic. It might even be more than that. I'm starting off not with the top subject, and I rank them in order of their ability to cause damage to the human race and the globe itself. And the first one, of course, was perpetual warfare. Because once we start to lob nukes, basically the biosphere is gone and humanity is poisoned. And it's not a slow poisoning like vaccines or GMOs or chemtrails. It would be something that would affect the entire population of the biosphere with a serious immediacy. So I'm taking perpetual warfare and I'm putting it at the end because it's going to be the crescendo for this series. So number 2 on our list was GMOs. And for anybody who has seen the flyer we passed around, today is going to be a serious topic, a serious discussion on GMOs. But I would caution everybody, another reason why we put the articles in is we don't have enough time for everything we say to go into minute details about it. So for each topic and each article that we give you to follow along with, there are a series of links. So we will discuss generalities and maybe even a little bit more specific than generalities. But if you really want to delve into anything that's said here, there are an abundant amount of links. And as Paula will tell you, I will say quite often, Google it.
Google it.
And when I say Google it, it's a point that might be a little hard for people who are new to a topic or skeptical of a topic to swallow. So when I say Google it, I really mean it. And even though I have links available that show the research that I've done to write these articles, and all the articles you get, I have written, or I have written a preface for. In other words, I might get a short article from someone else that is really, really good on a topic, and I will write at least a preface to give you a lead in to their information. So these are all articles written by the Liberty Beacon, and a vast majority of them have been written by myself. So the research has been done by myself. I am not, and here I go again, Paula, an expert at anything, but I know enough about everything to have a good, intelligent conversation about anything. So don't hold my feet to the fire as an expert. And if I am discussing something and I say this is a fact, then I know it's a fact. If I say I believe or I perceive, then I'm telling you that I'm confident in my information, but I am not an expert on that information. And I will never lead you astray. But what we're going to discuss today is one of the most relevant issues, not only to the health of humanity, but to the health of the biosphere, and that's GMOs. So the name of the show today, or the topic today, is GMOs, a direct path to extinction. I don't overstate things. I might overemphasize, but that's why it's called a rant.
True.
But I don't overstate. And when I say GMOs, a direct path to extinction, this, unless we the people interject and quickly, I'm not talking about a year or 2 years or 3 years down the road. I'm talking about the movement we have going now has the increase in size and amplitude. We know that screaming in a very loud voice, and I don't literally mean screaming, I mean with a very loud voice, meaning lots of us, works. Because as we all know, the Monsanto Protection Act is no longer in the Farm Bill or the continued spending bill.
Doesn't that rock? That
It
freaking
rocks because of you, Paula, the Liberty Beacon, and everybody out there who knows anything about GMOs and is concerned, all lent their voice. We got a hold of our senators and we held their feet to the fire. Anybody who knows me knows I'm very fond of saying, and I won't beat the drum on this a lot, but a lot of what's going on in this country, a lot of the fault is ours because we have failed to hold the people who make our laws and perceive that they rule us. We have failed to hold their feet to the fire. So we have proven to ourselves and everybody else that a loud voice makes a difference. Well, in GMOs, it isn't loud enough yet. As big a movement as this is, it needs to be bigger. And 93% of this country, and Google that number, 93% of this country wants their food products labeled.
Labeled.
But yet we're being ignored. Yet laws and bills and House resolutions and guidelines set down by the FDA and the CDC and every other member of the alphabet soup are going 100% contrary to what 93% of this population wants. That's freaking insane. And the only mechanism that's going to affect this is our voices. Okay? So we're going to get on the road and talk about GMOs. Now, this is not going to be just this show and then we'll go to vaccines next week because there's way too much information. GMOs are going to be at least 2 weeks, maybe even 3 weeks, depending on how much we get covered each show and how sidetracked I get, which I tend to do. Paula, you're going to have to keep me on track here, girl.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Someone's going to do it for me.
It's like a chihuahua trying to push a locomotive. But anyway, this is a topic of extreme magnitude. And you all have in front of you the link to the main essay or article, all right, which is the 4 weapons of mass destruction humanity may not survive. We touched on each one of those topics last week. We pretty much beat that up. That link is there for all of you who are joining us this week and were not available for the first show when we did the overview, so that you can look that over and get an idea of what we're going to be discussing. But the article we're going to be discussing first today is one that I wrote, and it is called a GMO rant. Okay? And most of these are a GMO rant. But the name of the article is You Don't Need
Don't need
Don't
guns to cull the herd if you have GMOs.
That's
Oh,
it.
sorry.
Nope, that's it. You can chime in anytime, Paula. I'm sure they'd rather hear your voice than mine. But just listen as I repeat that topic again a little slower, okay? You don't need guns to cull the herd if you have GMOs. Well, before we delve into the article, let me explain that. I'm talking about genocide. When I say cull the herd, and we've already been over the elites, we did a 7-show series on that. They feel that the perfect population for the planet Earth is 500 million. That is stated in many of their documents. That is stated on the Georgia Guidestones for everybody to see. It's a big granite monument. And it clearly states on there that the population of this planet should not exceed 500 million people. There's 7.5 billion of us. Well, how do you go from 7.5 billion to 500 million? Well, let me give you a clue. Perpetual war, GMOs, vaccines, and chemtrails. But today, the mechanism we're discussing is GMOs. And they have a huge reach across this planet. There isn't a country on the face of this earth that doesn't use genetically modified or engineered eat or use foodstuffs, feed for their cattle, or even if they don't allow GMOs in their country, they still use Roundup, which is one of the most deadly toxins ever produced by mankind, and a genetically engineered toxin. So GMOs are number 2 on the hit list. And when I talk genocide, again, I'm not overstating. So when I say you don't need guns to cull the herd if you have GMOs, why start massive wars across the planet and destroy the biosystem for the 500 million that are going to remain if you can do it with vaccines and GMOs and chemical spraying in the air? But what most of these idiots aren't thinking far enough ahead of is that GMOs are one of the biggest threats to the biosphere and fall in right after nuclear weapons. They are catastrophic. And there are 800 scientists, Google this, who have signed a petition stating that GMOs are dangerous to humanity, to the biosphere, to all of the animal plant life there is on this planet, and that GMOs should be restricted or pulled until further research is done on them. And I believe that the actual number is like 827 now. And these are renowned scientists from across the planet. It's not Roger, TLB, sitting here getting hot under the collar. These are people who have made their living, their life, studied for years, gotten doctorates, master's degrees, some of them with multiple degrees, saying this. They are educated people. They know of what they speak. And they're being ignored. It's, well, catastrophic is the word I have to come back to. But let's start into the subject matter, or we're going to run out of time. But again, I've already extended this series. And a series is only as long or as short as it needs to be. If this needs to be 10 shows long, it will. But GMOs is not something we can touch on in an hour and impress upon everybody the true evil of this mechanism. It just isn't enough time. And I realized that. I have 7 or 8 links ready for this show. We might not get to all of them. And I have at least 15 more in reserve, all articles I have written on this topic. Whereas I am not an expert, I am far from being ignorant or a layman on this topic. And
Not an
again,
expert, but your voice has reached a few, so that even lamestream media is mentioning you. Kind of scared.
that's right. We were mentioned on Fox News the other day. That really,
Wake
I
up,
didn't agree,
Roger.
didn't agree
That
with
that
what they said.
rocked.
I didn't agree with
So
what they said, Paula, but it was
I didn't
nice.
either, but they were trying to cover their butt, is what it was. So
Right. But they did give us some praise, the Liberty Beacon Project. So it was worth an honorable mention. And no, I am not a Fox News fan. But
I
if you
am
look at
not
the bottom
either.
of what's that?
Neither am I.
Okay. I used to be. I used to be a Fox News junkie, but that's another story. Okay? If you look at the bottom of this article, you're going to find 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 links that are going to give you in-depth information on everything that's mentioned in this article, because I tend to rant. So I provide links so that people understand that what might be considered to be the outlandish things I'm saying, I can actually back up through other people's research, not just my own. So let's get started with this. GMOs, genetically modified organisms, are a freaking nightmare. You can't say it with any less emphasis than that. Congress, our government, in total, continue to ignore our request or our demands for more research and investigations into the health risks of GMO, even ignoring petitions with over 1 million signatures on them for labeling. Just push it aside. It doesn't matter. Well, tell that to the people who supported the Monsanto Protection Act. It does matter, people. It didn't in the past because not enough of us were speaking up. That's changing. Because wait, I thought these people worked for us. The only way they're going to know or remember they work for us is if we scream loud enough. If we talk with a big enough voice. And we can all whisper. But there's 320 million people in this country, and if you've got 320 million people whispering, it's going to be pretty damn loud. All right. Meanwhile, the rest of the industrialized world, including third world countries like Peru, Brazil, countries that some of us would consider to be backwards, restrict or outright ban GMOs as hazardous to their citizens' health. Wait a minute. Peru bans GMOs because they're hazardous to the health of their citizens. We are supposed to be the most technologically advanced civilization of all societies on this planet. But yet our government doesn't see anything wrong with GMOs. They're basically the same thing as non-GMOs. You take GMO corn and you compare it to non-GMO corn, and they're statistically the same thing. Bullshit! They are not. And there is an abundance of proof to show that. There is a virtual plethora, a cornucopia. How many more funny words could I use, Paula?
You can do it.
To show this. But yet it's ignored. Farmers are forced to use patented GMO seeds. When I say forced, it doesn't mean Monsanto drives onto their property and shoves it in their face and says, you have to grow this. But let's touch on that a little bit. How many is their crop? confiscates it or sues them in court for more money than they can afford to pay because they are in fact growing and are going to sell a patented GMO crop. What is the only way a farmer can avoid this if he knows that the farmer to his left, the farmer to his right, the farmer in front of him, and the farmer behind him are all growing GMO crops? That poor SOB has no choice but to grow GMO crops. He literally has no choice. So if he wants to remain competitive and in business, he's got to fall in line. And these poor SOBs are not even permitted to save their own seeds. Each year they must buy new seeds from companies like Monsanto, and Monsanto owns 90% of the genetically modified seed market. Google it. Hundreds of thousands. I'm not exaggerating, I never do. I just say things loudly. Of farmers in India committed suicide because of failure to deliver on promises made to them by Monsanto. And one of them was the tremendous cost of the seeds they were required to buy to grow their crops. Whether it's BT cotton or BT corn or whatever it was. An untold number of suicides in India because of GMOs. The GMOs didn't kill them. Monsanto's policies and practices and lies killed them. Because if they had not been involved with Monsanto, they would never have committed suicide. Do you ever hear that on the mainstream media? Does Monsanto ever talk about that or brag about that? Anyway, they also, and yes, I have an article on this, and I have a link at the bottom here, because most people aren't going to believe what I'm about to say if you're not looking at the article or the link, have hired paramilitary jackboots to go onto these farms and enforce the patent and contractual requirements Monsanto sets down. I'm not kidding. But if a farmer speaks out on issues such as his pigs going sterile or going into false labor over and over again because they're eating GMO feed, which, believe it or not, is the same freaking corn you and I eat. But we'll get into that a little later in this show. So he's losing his livelihood because of the GMO feed. But if he tries to say anything, then he's either threatened with a huge lawsuit or he gets arrested and thrown in jail. If you think I'm joking, do some research on these links or Google it. Now let's get into something a little closer to home and a lot more evil. I'm going to give you a couple of short sentences, and then we'll delve into some of them a little deeper. Feeding GMO soy to infants may be fatal. Eating GMO corn linked to fatal lung disease. Eating GMO wheat may destroy your liver. Yes, the links are down at the bottom. The research has been done. Our government, this is the most evil thing I'm going to say today. Our government provides free infant formula to underprivileged children in a program called WIC. They give free formula to over 2 million infants a year. But these underprivileged children or these poor mothers that qualify for this program are only allowed
to purchase with these stamps they get or coupons GMO brand infant formula. That formula is made with the same soy and other additives that I just described in the first three sentences. Feeding GMO soy, which is a major component in infant formula, to infants may be fatal. If we have seen this study, don't you think the government has seen this study? Don't you think the CDC has seen this study? Tell me how much more evil this can be. Google it or look at the links I've provided to you. The government is knowingly giving infants, and they are restricted to this, GMO formula that they have to be well aware can be fatal to infants or can lead to other diseases like, autism. And that's another link we'll get into on the next show. Because anybody out there who doesn't think there isn't a link between GMOs and autism, you're listening to the wrong show. Let's continue.
Absolutely.
My question is, why is this being done? Don't these people work for us? Don't we send these people to Washington to protect us, to watch our backs, to ensure that evil and dangerous things don't happen to us? So how the hell can they be doing just the opposite? Not only that, but forcing these underprivileged mothers and children into taking something they know can cause catastrophic health issues and telling them that's all you're going to get. You can't get the good stuff. According to some very convincing research, okay, and this was done outside the United States, you had to know that was coming. Because when you hear what the research was, yeah, I was laughing too, Paula. When you hear what the research is, you're going to go, no way. Well over 2 million deaths in the U.S. can be attributed to or are as a result of us eating GMOs since 2008. That's 5 years. Almost 6 now, but 5 years. Let's say. GMOs came on the market in 1996. So we have been eating this crap for how long? But the study that was done, and I believe it was done in Russia, but again, it's in the links. If not, Google it. Well over 2 million deaths can be attributed in this country. And that doesn't mean you eat an ear of corn and drop dead. That means you die of Alzheimer's, you die of dementia, you die of cancer, you die of, which are a result of what we eat. And when 80% of the products you buy in the grocery store that are processed and a lot of the fruit and the vegetables you eat are genetically engineered or modified, how the hell do you get away from it? You get away from it via education. There are a lot of websites out there. Okay? Natural Health, Natural News, and a couple of others just off the top of my head that can link you to places where you can go where you will never, ever walk out with a genetically modified or engineered product in your grocery bag. And if you don't think that's important, you're listening to the wrong show. I'm going to repeat that number one more time, and then we'll continue. Over 2 million deaths in this country, America, because we're the most GMO'd nation on the face of the earth. can be attributed to the influence of GMOs in our diet. 2 million deaths or more. And this study's a year old. And it only started in 2008. So it's just the tip of the iceberg. Wow, Paula. You know, I talked about some things that really pissed me off, but this one here, you know how I feel about vaccines and GMOs.
Oh, yes, I do.
Because what it all boils down to, my friends, is Americans are sicker at this point in our history with diseases such as cancer and many other maladies. They're at an all-time high. This nation has never been this sick in its history. And it's getting worse. It's not getting better. It's getting worse on an exponential rate. We are one of the... Go ahead.
Sorry. You know what he wants to do to change that, don't you? Bring those cancer rates down?
Tell me.
Change the definition.
I knew it. God, I knew it.
and that's true.
I know.
Jesus.
When we get into vaccines, you're going to find out that polio has not disappeared. That several other
The name
diseases
has
have not disappeared. They have just redefined some of the symptoms and called them something else. And if you think that I'm kidding you, you will find out that I'm not. Okay? When I say we are sicker than we have ever been, I will tell you, as I mentioned last week, we are number one in the world in autism. Pat yourself on the back, America. You're number one. We are number one in the world at dementia. That's when your brain is fried. The body's there, it's working, the brain is not. The lights are out and nobody's home. We are number one in the world in dementia. And we are one of the highest ranking nations on the face of the earth, not number one, but damn close to it, for cancer. These are three things that absolutely destroy your life. Dementia and autism may not be terminal, but you'll never lead a productive life. Although there are some treatments for autism that do show some promise. And part of it includes cutting GMOs out of your diet, because GMOs affect the lining of your stomach. And without the bacteria that lines your stomach, your entire immune system and your bodily functions degrade to the point where it can be catastrophic or fatal. And the biotoxins bred into or genetically engineered into these Monsanto crops is what destroys that bacteria lining your stomach. Google it. I know of what I speak. Or wait until next week's show when we'll actually go over that. The most alarming aspect of this is that this trend just happens to coincide with, guess what? The introduction and rise of GMOs in our diets. I was born in 54. We were one of the healthiest nations on the planet. All the way up until the early 90s, this was one of the most healthy nations on the planet. And now we are by far one of the most, if not the most ill, the sickest population on the planet. And we have seen a monumental increase in the amount of GMOs in our diet. Again, over 80% of everything you will find in the grocery store is genetically engineered or modified. Coincidence only goes so far before you have to call it something else. And I'm calling it something else. And yet, the government has thrown no red flags up. GMOs are fine. They're the same thing as eating non-genetically modified corn. Except this corn was genetically modified or engineered so that if a certain bug eats the corn, his freaking stomach lining explodes. It bursts. Now you tell me, if I grab an ear of corn, and I love raw corn. I grew up on a farm and we had at least 100 acres of corn that was just for the family and our neighbors. And I used to love picking an ear and eating it raw. Man, that is so tasty. Why boil it? You know, why knock some of the flavor out of it? That was so good. So you're telling me that the same crap that's going to burst a bug's stomach is going to have no effect on you at all? Because if you think that, you're listening to the wrong show. And there is scientific proof that this is happening. That the Bt toxins do strongly affect mammalian blood. And yes, I have an article on that. That's coming next week. Well, we're well past the stage here of where we're being treated like lab rats. We're past that. What I see here harkens on to something much more sinister. Now read the title of today's show again. But I'm not done with this. It gets worse. Google the increasing sterility rate in the United States of America. It's on the rise at a neck-breaking speed. I'm dead serious. Google it. The sterility factor in this country is many times what it was when I was a kid. Many times what it was in the early 1990s. Less than 20 years ago, sterility in the United States was not even an issue. It was never discussed. Now, it's a huge issue. So, why? Well, you gotta know what's coming. Okay, right from the article, and I did the research on this. Again, I won't speak of something I don't know, or I will tell you I'm not sure, or I don't know. I won't presuppose. I won't suppose at all. Sterility is soaring in America, and our government says it doesn't have a clue why. Well, let me tell you why. I don't have billions and billions of dollars to fund billions and billions of research programs. Excuse me, maybe millions or hundreds of thousands of research programs across the nation. I got a little carried away there, Paula. But anyway, I'm going to tell you something that our government, with its massive amount of resources and massive amount of scientists on their payroll, can't figure out. Not only that, but I'm going to connect the dots for you, and it's going to make sense. That's the really tragic part of this. You're going to understand when I'm done with what I'm about to say. And this is all factual. It's in the links down below. And if you don't want to look at the links, Google it. Yes, Paula, I heard your mic come on.
I was going to say it, but you beat me to it. Google it.
It is a well-known and documented fact amongst those of us who do research on this topic that a biotech company called Epicite, spelled Epicite, for those who don't want to look at the links and want to Google it, Epicite, in conjunction with the U.S. government, meaning the government funded the research of Epicite, patented a corn that produces a spermicide, just like the corn Monsanto grows that produces Bt toxins. rendering those who eat it sterile. There is a protein that attaches itself to the sperm, which absolutely makes the sperm worthless. The little swimmers ain't got a damn thing to do after that. I'm letting that sink in. That's a pregnant pause, but it's there on purpose, okay?
Absolutely. It was working too on me.
This is a fact, people, but it gets worse than that. If you try to find out if the corn you are eating is in fact this corn, that request for information is illegal. They will tell you flat out, you can't ask us that, and we ain't going to tell you that. Either follow the link I provided, or, Paula, I'm going to let you say it this time.
Google it.
So now we have a corn developed by a biotech company, paid for by the U.S. government, that was invented solely for the purpose of making human beings sterile. This is not a joke. And yet it gets worse than this. Okay? God, I get done with a show like this and, I think of all the evil in the world. I really do. And
it's terrifying sometimes if you think about it.
But that's not all. It's not just the apposite corn. We all know, any of us who have done even the most minimum research on GMOs, that a French study was released and that the Brits did a study showing that the third generation of rats fed a diet of Monsanto genetically modified corn or grains were sterile. So you don't need the hepatite. Just eat the BT corn. Or eat the corn that's doused with Monsanto's Roundup. It has such a jovial name. It has such a great name for being one of the biggest evils ever perpetrated on mankind. Roundup. Sounds like a bunch of cowboys, yeehaw, going out to get some cattle. It's not. It's death in a bottle. And we will do, if not an entire show, at least the majority of a show on Roundup alone. So like I said, over 80% of all the foods we eat in America, that we buy in our stores, that are processed, and even our vegetables and our fruits, are now genetically modified or engineered. So why is the sterility rate soaring? It seems like a no-brainer to me, but yet our government can't figure it out. Really? Is there anybody listening to this conversation right now that doesn't understand it? Between the epicite and several world-renowned studies, Google them or look at the links below, that prove, and these are long-term studies, not the 90-day studies Monsanto funds. You can't find out if a rat's going to be sterile in 90 days. And rats only live for what, at the most 2 years? So 3 generations is a couple of years. And you don't have to wait till the 3rd generation dies. You just have to wait till they're old enough to hump and have babies to know they're sterile. These researchers extended their research to include that longevity. These are not guesses. These are not possibilities or probabilities. They are facts. So tell me again why our government is so puzzled at the fact that the sterility rate is going through the roof in this country. I know. You guys all know. If you didn't before, you know now. Everything I said You can prove yourself just by Googling or looking at the links I gave you. So why doesn't our government know what the hell's going on? And why do they promote and force poor mothers to give genetically modified? They're starting these kids on this from the time they get their very first formula. Do you for 1 second believe that I know this, sitting in my house, way out in the middle of the country, in Montana, in the boondocks, beyond anything you can believe, that I know about this? But our government, with all of their resources, and Monsanto, with all of their resources, hasn't got a clue. The government funded this research. They are not only responsible, they're complicit. How are they complicit? Well, let's get into that for a few seconds. Our president appoints Monsanto VPs. To do what? As czars to the FDA, to shape policy on the foods and the safety of the products we put in our mouths, we bathe our children with. That's right. I just published an article about Johnson & Johnson. That baby shampoo that's supposed to be so gentle and good for your kid contains carcinogens that Johnson & Johnson has been promising to get out of their product for 4 years, and it's still there. I know, I did the research. Okay, I'm going to try and calm down just a little bit, and we'll go on with how is the government complicit. So now we've got VPs as czars of the FDA. A huge red flag and a conflict of interest. A Supreme Court judge looks for Monsanto and rules in their favor 100% of the time. Even when the other judges on the court don't, he does. He has not accused himself one time from a Monsanto case, which he should do automatically. Another huge conflict of interest. Monsanto just spent $43 million on defeating a labeling bill in just one state, California. Think of what you could do with $43 million. There's 50 states in this nation. Are they going to spend $40 million in every state? Do the math. Can they afford it? Probably. Why? Because, hell, that's all we can eat. That's all that's available to us. That's not true. And we'll explain that in another show. We'll tell you exactly where you can go to get food that doesn't have the evil of GMO or genetic engineering in it. $43 million to defeat a labeling bill. Just a labeling bill, okay? At one point, Monsanto even had government-mandated immunity against prosecution. Ha ha! No more! We took care of that. We. Pat yourself on the back for that. Anybody who spoke out. Any one of yous. You are all the reason. So it does work. It would seem still, that one small victory aside, that their power and influence and control is almost absolute in this country. We have a fascistic government. No, I'm not talking about politics. Fascism was defined by Benito Mussolini in 1932 when he was asked to define fascism. And he is the father of fascism and Hitler's mentor. He stated, fascism can better be defined as the marriage of large corporations and their power and the state. What do you see happening here? Isn't that exactly what we're seeing? Isn't that exactly what's being perpetrated on us? So tell me how this is not a fascistic government. Explain it to me. Because nothing you're going to say is going to convince me that I'm wrong, because I'm not. Corporations control this country, our food, the products we bathe our children in, and so much more. Not you and I. Because if we win one little victory like we just did, we lose 10,000. That's going to change. All right. And how do they have this kind of power and influence? Lobbies on Capitol Hill. And what they're funding campaigns. They're bribing senators and congressmen and highly placed administrative personnel. And that's not even hard to dig up. I mean, everybody knows that. They're the most corrupt bunch imaginable. Lobbies
sitting right up there in the front.
Lobbies are billions of dollars a year. Billions of dollars a year are spent lobbying. Monsanto alone spent between 10 and 12 million dollars in 2011. Can't find the figures for 2012, and 2013 is not done yet. 12 million. How many big corporations do you think there are? And not just American companies. I'm talking about global companies that might have an American presence, like Toyota. Okay? Billions of dollars are spent. So what this boils down to, or what it amounts to, is a multi-million-dollar attack on you and me, on we the people, every single year. If you don't think that's reality, that's not going to be hard to research. Now, we've got about 3 minutes left, so I'm going to get through the rest of this particular article, and we'll start on another one next week. Gee, Paula, I think I gave you 6 or 7, and we just barely got through one. But it's
yeah,
this.
You gave me quite a few.
It's this important, people. It is this important. Sterility, cancer, you name it. You know, when I get this angry, I stutter. Dementia, Alzheimer's, and the biggest one of all, autism, which is at such an epidemic rate, and our government seems to be doing nothing about it. But yet, it is the biggest catastrophe ever to hit this country. Ever. 1 out of 28 males and 1 out of 50 females in this country will suffer autism. Nothing affects this country more than that does. What the hell is our country doing about it? Not a frickin' thing. Or if they are, very little. If I can state these facts in this article and back them up with documented research, why the hell can't our government? Why aren't our prisons full of these mass murderers? And that's what they are. Because they're not ignorant of the facts. If this little yokel sitting out in the middle of freaking Montana knows it, you know they know it. So what it all boils down to is just how deep does this rabbit hole go? Is it simply power-hungry, greed-driven industry out to bilk the American population of every penny they can, even to the detriment of our health and our lives, or something much more sinister? Can you say genocide? Because it would seem from all that I have stated above and during this show that you don't need a gun to call the herd if you've got GMOs. And Paula, I actually finished the show 2 minutes early. My God.
Gosh.
The last line on this, before you get to the link, says, some references, and there are thousands more. I could have literally put 100 links here, but the links I put are the ones that are the most germane to what's contained in this article. Believe me, as we go forward, you will find we have just scratched the surface. The next thing we're going to talk about is the collapse of the biosphere. And when the global biosphere collapses, this planet becomes unlivable for human life. Period. And there are already scientists screaming that at the top of their lungs. It's happening. As a matter of fact, some are saying we're damn near at the point of no return, where it cannot be repaired or replaced. All right, Paula, is there anything you'd like to say? I don't ever give you much chance to talk, and I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I had a bit of background stuff at home too, so that's why I was a little bit more with the mic off a bit.
Okay.
Someone has a cold.
As a matter of fact, I had a sneezing fit for 4 hours before the show. I'm amazed I haven't sneezed once during the show.
Whoa,
But
that's
I can promise you all next week it will get more interesting. This will build to a very big crescendo. So we're just getting started. But I thank you all for listening. And as usual, Paula, you are always great to have on the show. And I appreciate so much your support. Good night,
thank you,
everybody.
Roger. Good night, y'all.